Hi everyone, I'm just gonna wait a couple more minutes for people to join and see the numbers are slowly climbing. I'm just gonna give it like a minute or two before I introduce myself and start. Okay. Well, we have a lot of people joining us today. Welcome everybody, good morning. My name is Maria Otero. I will be the moderator today. We're really excited to welcome you to this conference. It's our first session out of 4. It is a virtual conference about the lived experiences of immigrants and refugees in Ohio. Our hope is that this conference will allow you to get some insights into the lives of immigrants and refugees, and hopefully get an ideas of some of the challenges, the good and the bad, from about living in Ohio, and also give you ideas and hopefully inspire you to get involved, to find ways that you can participate, with organizations that do really good work, that help immigrants and refugees, maybe get involved in politics. So this is just kind of just what we want to just make sure that we welcome you into the community in a way. Me personally, I am an immigration attorney at Advocates for Basic Legal Equality. I've been there for 5 years, but today's session is going to be about lived experiences. So it's just sort of like we have some great panelists that are going to talk today about their own experiences and their lives as immigrants and refugees. And we also have an attorney who works with immigrants. There are actually the other panels, which we hope that you will join. We'll touch different topics such as education and immigration on the rest of the week. And we hope that you join all of them. Today, we are really proud to introduce our keynote speaker, Daniela Pierre Bravo. She is originally from Chile, but she grew up in Lima, Ohio. She is a TV producer at MSNBC Morning Joe. She's also a writer and a columnist. And she's a DACA recipient, and she is here to talk to us about her story growing up in Ohio, getting DACA, and how she overcame some of these challenges and to become such a successful person. So I will leave that for Daniela to now tell us her story.
Hi everyone. Oh, it's so exciting to be with you guys all. I'll try to keep this short, and you, Maria, you can jump in with any further questions. But I didn't realize the weight of what being undocumented was, and it was really hard being a young undocumented in the shadows Latina in a small conservative town with good people, but that just didn't understand my situation. And I didn't tell anybody my situation because I internalized so much bias. And that in itself brought in a lot of struggles that I'm still dealing with. But, growing up, it was a constant search for little yeses. Having so many doors close up all at once was pretty unforgiving. And so even the concept of going to college, was so foreign to me. I had parents who never went to an American college, and I, knew that education was going to open doors, but I didn't know what those doors were going to open to, because at the end of the day, even if I worked hard, miraculously got myself accepted, paid college in cash, I didn't have a pathway. Nobody was going to hire me because I was undocumented, and nobody had those answers for me in the small town that I lived in. So you got to do what you have to do when you are one of those people where, whether you're first generation, an immigrant, you just have to figure it out little by little. And so that's what I did. I graduated high school and I thought, okay, I'm going to have to make this work somehow. So I ended up applying to Miami University by paper application. They had invited me to their campus, recruited me through this program where high achieving minorities could go to the campus, kind of settle in a couple of days with some of the current students, and then give you like a $2,000 scholarship for the year, which was nothing compared to the hefty tuition. But I was just so thankful to have that one little seed of opportunity. And I went to college not knowing how I was going to end college, but I said yes. I said yes to that small, it's not even about being positive. It's just about having hope. right? And so I ended up going to college at Miami University. I had to take a semester off here and there because obviously I was paying through cash. If you're undocumented or if you don't know, you don't have access to, you know, government scholarships. You don't have access to loans. So you really have to pay cash. So that's what I did. And little by little, I saved up, took semesters off here and there, graduated Miami University. And then, Maria, here I am about to graduate and still undocumented. DACA was nowhere near the horizon. We had no idea, you know, that President Obama was sort of a surprise to us all. But I thought, okay, I'm about to graduate. It's the summer before I graduate. What the heck do I do? I need to get some experience. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to make it anywhere, it's going to be New York City. And by the way, Maria, I didn't know anybody in New York City. I didn't have friends. I didn't have family. I had zero reference. I had never gone to New York City. But I knew that it was a melting pot. I knew that it was, if I could just get one opportunity, that I could make something out of it, right? So on my resume, I did my research and I thought, okay, nobody is going to bring me in for an interview for an unpaid internship, right? Internships were unpaid then. For somebody that lives in the middle of nowhere, right? Remember, I lived in Lima, Ohio, tiny little town that nobody knows of. And so I thought, okay, I'm used to people making excuses about me and my situation. So I'm not gonna let anybody do that. So on my resume, I added at the top, you know, where you put that little address. I said that I lived in one of the dorms in New York. Okay, all right, send in the resume. I applied everywhere, right? No opportunity was too small. I applied to boutique jewelry agencies. I applied to marketing agencies, and I did a lot of research, and I found that P. Diddy's or Sean Combs, or however you call him, had a little marketing agency called Blue Flame Agency. And a lot of people didn't know about it because it was very tiny. And it was mostly, you know, most of the people that worked there were local. So I applied there. Here I am at Miami University. I'm studying for my econ exam. I get a call from a 212 number. And I'm like, oh my God, it's New York. Okay, so I answer the phone and we go to a screening interview, and they said, okay, well, how about you come in for an in-person interview tomorrow? We want you to meet the head of marketing. And I didn't even think about it. I just said yes. So I hang up the phone, and meanwhile, you know, I'm still in the middle of the cornfields of Ohio, Oxford, Ohio. And I thought, okay, how the heck am I going to get to New York City tomorrow? I couldn't get on a plane, right? I didn't have a state ID. I couldn't drive there. I didn't have a driver's license. So I ended up, you know, okay, well, buses surely go to New York City. So I went on the Greyhound bus website, and I got literally on the next bus out. 18 hours through the night, 9 stops along the way. I get to smelly, stinky Port Authority, which if you've ever been, it's very sketchy. So I clean up, I change, I put makeup on, I get ready, I get out, I'm in Times Square. I have no idea where I'm going. I didn't have one of these. I had one of these, but they didn't have the maps, the Google Maps. That required extra data, and I wasn't the person. My family wasn't paying for extra data, so I had printed out a MapQuest. And I was like trying to figure out where I was going in the middle of Times Square, get to the internship interview. And I'm like, yeah, I just got here from Ohio. I'm so excited. I know I don't have probably as much experience as everybody else, but I'm just really hungry for this opportunity. And she's like, you just came from Ohio? She's like, we could have done a phone interview. We could have done that, you know? And I was like, it doesn't matter. I didn't want to miss out this opportunity. And so that is the kind of energy that I brought into everything, because I knew what was up against me. I knew that I had, you know, I didn't have networks. I didn't have professional mentors. I didn't have anybody telling me, you know, how things went. I went to that internship without knowing what a coffee book was, right? I was sent out to do errands, and they were like, go get a coffee book for our new activation. I had no idea what that was. So I was a fish out of fresh water. I was completely clueless. Long story short, I go back to Ohio on the bus that night. A few weeks later, I get called back, and they offer me the unpaid internship, which I am so excited about. And then I get another unpaid internship at MTV Networks in their ad sales department, which was like the less sexy part of the business. But I got it. And I ended up getting those 2 unpaid internships. Really didn't know how I was going to go. My parents weren't, you know, giving me financial support. I was still paying for college, but I had a few bucks saved. I got back on the bus a few weeks later. I spent all my money on lodging. And I thought, okay, well, I got the internship. I'm here in New York. What can I do to survive, right? Literally to like put food in my mouth. So I got 4 side jobs that I found online and just like going down Restaurant Row and handing out my resume. I was a babysitter. I was walking dogs during my lunch break. I worked at bars. I worked promoted at clubs. I had no idea what I was doing, but again, that energy. And Maria, like I didn't know this was coming, but I was sitting in the middle of my cubicle in the middle of the summer of 2012. You remember this, June 2012.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I get a phone call or a text message from a parent. And they say, turn on the TV. Turn on the TV. The president is talking, turn on the TV. I'm in my cubicle. There's no TVs around. So I get out, I run to the coffee shop, the deli that had a little tiny TV. And I see on that screen, President Obama doing the address for DACA. It completely changed my life. In 1 second, it completely changed my life. And I'm so grateful, but you know, it's one of those things, I didn't know that opportunity was coming. And I think that that's such the spirit of an immigrant. You just keep going, you just keep finding yeses, and that turned everything around. And so the summer I went back, I finished my last semester at Miami University. I applied to DACA literally the day it came out, DACA in hand. I ended up saying, okay, sky's the limit. Sky's the limit. I got my work permit. I did that crazy summer in New York. And I really wanted to work in media. I really wanted to be a storyteller. I really wanted to tell the stories of the people, Latino, not Latino, from my small town. Those voices were not being heard. And at the time, you know, that was a lofty idea. You know, I thought I was going to go to law school because I just wanted to extend the years of schooling because I didn't know what I was going to do after schooling. So it was an opportunity for me to have done the hard work and now really think, what is it that I'm passionate about? What is it that I want to do? So I applied to the NBC Page program, which I had read everywhere was one of those programs where, you know, only white rich kids had, and it was only one of those things where, you know, if you knew somebody and your resume was sent through, then maybe you could get a call back. But I ended up applying online and I got a call back for one interview. I sold the heck out of myself and my story at that first interview, went to the second interview, and then finally to the interview in New York City, back at 30 Rock. And so I told the story of that summer, and I just poured my heart out about, you know, the importance of what it is to go for what you want and to not take no for an answer. And so I ended up getting the Page program acceptance. I was like, can you give me 6 months? I really need to make money to be able to live in New York City. So I waitressed and I worked my Mary Kay business for 6 months. And 6 months later, I, you know, came with like one little tiny suitcase at an apartment and that I found on Craigslist. And here I am, you know, 7 years later, I'm a booking producer on Morning Joe. I have written this book with Mika Brzezinski, one of my mentors and idols from the start, Earn It, which is a guidebook for young women, the guidebook that I wish I had growing up, for people that don't have mentors, that don't have that know-how. And yeah, and I'm really excited. And I just want to say, if you're listening to this and you've ever had a situation where you felt like you couldn't keep going, you felt like you didn't have the answers, you felt like nobody was there to hold your hand, you know, take a moment and realize that all those answers are, you know, within you. And I think that, Maria, you know, that is the blessing as an immigrant, I think we get, is to have that spirit of just finding a yes.
Yes, I totally agree with all that. But I do have a question. So how do you keep going after the no's? Because I feel like a lot of people, you know, you get the no's and one after the other, and then, you know, some people might get discouraged. So like, what has helped you continue to be like, no, I'm gonna go again and let me try to get a yes this time?
I've been thinking a lot about that because I'm writing a second book. It's going to be out spring 2020. And, you know, it's hard to tell somebody when they're down, just be positive, everything's going to work out. When you're down and you don't see those answers, you know, you realize that sort of positivity does not necessarily help. what I focused on, which was really helpful, is the hope. The hope that knowing that this situation right now, as uncomfortable it is, as disadvantageous as it was, it is a learning lesson. What am I learning in this moment of not have-nots, or this moment of not getting to where I want to go, that I can build on? That's what I held on to. It's like this idea of where you are right now is not where you will be tomorrow. And it's focusing on those small seeds of hope. That's all it was back then. It's hope, hope, hope. And for me, I'm a person of faith. That's been very ingrained growing up, so that certainly helped. But it's focusing on those small opportunities. The $2,000 scholarship that I got, which was like nothing compared to the total tuition, but that was a glimmer of hope, right? The small jobs that I got, finding Mary Kay and trying to, build a business, right? At 18 years old, a little bit of hope. It's something that I didn't have before that. And so once you start realizing that you don't have to have all the clear answers, you don't have to have a linear pathway, whether you're an immigrant or not, right? This applies to everybody, is that we can focus on the better days ahead. And it's hard, right? Because in our Latino community, and I intertwine this all with mental health. And I've realized it's much more intertwined than I realized it was. God bless my mom. She has, she's such an inspiration to me, and her hard work has, given us everything that we've had. And it's hard for me to talk about, but she was always the one to say, and I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but, just smile, be positive. Don't feel that way. Don't feel bad. You have everything. There's people that don't have what you have. And that just repressed all of the emotions of sadness and, disappointment, and all these negative emotions, just suppressed them. And so what I needed to do back then to be able to allow myself to kind of breathe a little bit better and to know that the positive days were ahead was to know that I don't have to be positive all the time. I just have to have hope that today is not going to be like tomorrow, and that today is going to be a learning lesson to have a better tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of times we think that you just have to keep positive and every single day just to get through the hard times. But yeah, sometimes you just have to sit down and be sad for a day, and then the next day you pick it up again. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think on that topic, I want to know, as having DACA, there's so many uncertainties, especially now. How do you deal with that? Like, I know we talk a lot about self-care, and we talk, and we're just talking on the topic of maybe having a day to be sad about it, but there's, having DACA must be really uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So how do you deal with that?
Sister, I've got a lot of sad days, but that's the thing. It's like, it's all rhetoric. And we have been in limbo since before 2017. I mean, we went through 2017 with the anxiety and the stress of the rescinding of the program. I was out of the country back then when the administration rescinded the program. I was with a family member who was sick, and I had no idea how I was going to come back. I came back to JFK, and the TSA agent looked at me and said, as far as I'm concerned, DACA is over, right? So I had to stay there, wait for the manager to come out, because I was the first DACA recipient to come back to the States after the rescinding of the program at JFK anyways. And they didn't know what to do with me. And so I have thought about that a lot, Maria. And it's one of those things, it's just like, we cannot be part of somebody else's narrative. We just cannot. And it's a little bit of, I've let myself feel all the emotions, and I've written about this through op-eds. It's like sadness, disappointment, coraje, anger. It's like you got to let yourself feel all these emotions, because once you let them out of your system, you can think a little bit clearer. And that's the thing. It's like, I talk to my DACA family, to even people who, COVID, like people who are losing their jobs, and don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. It's like, you got to protect your energy. You got to protect your energy, because that energy is going to be the pathway. It's going to be your own pathway to be able to get to the solution part of it. I have been really interested in how mental health has affected us during this time. And I've written a piece for Know Your Value on how it's affecting young adults. And, you know, it all has to do with how you protect yourself and your energy. And, you know, I've spoken to a lot of, you know, psychologists about this, and you have to be able to carve out time to take care of you, right? Mentally, I mean, it all is intertwined. And my conversations have been, you know, when you let out these emotions, when you let yourself have this self-care time, whether it's meditation, whether it's just sitting with your own thoughts, your brain automatically, once you've let out all those emotions, it goes into problem solving. Like your brain wants to problem solve for you. So you have to get in that position where you can allow that brain to problem solve. But you got to get rid of that toxicity first. And so you asked me, you know, how do you deal with the uncertainty? And, you know, I hold on to that hope that was with me since I was 13, 14, 15, when I knew that I was undocumented and I didn't know what tomorrow was going to bring. You've got to hold on to that hope. And what does it mean for you? You know, is it your family? Is it your career? Is it something that you're passionate about? Like, what is that why? And there are ways that we can work on that why creatively on the side to be able to prepare for tomorrow. Like right now, I am building a platform for young women, a global platform for young women who don't have mentors, who want to have that real opportunity to access to mentors that they didn't have. And I am building on a global stage. I have people from Central America, Chile, Canada. We got to think bigger. We got to have to think bigger than our own kind of unique situations that are in front of us. And it doesn't make it super easy, but it makes the uncertainty and the stress a little bit manageable.
Yeah, and I think something that also helps is when you have support. And that's sort of one of the questions I wanted to ask you. And I just saw that in the chat, somebody asked something similar. So I'm going to kind of mix them together. Personally, so I came to the US when I was 16 and I was in Miami. So it's a little different. You know, everybody was immigrants. So it was like people understood, you know, when you just got here, what support do you need? So I was wondering, like, if there's anybody at school, whether it was in high school or in college, that tried to support you, and what could have they done maybe better to support you? Because I see somebody's also asking about if you found a mentor, when did you find them? Like what could the schools have done to support you better, to give you information? I mean, I'm thinking, for example, when I had to figure out how to do sign up for the SATs, nobody had told me anything about it, you know? So like, did your schools ever did anything for like to help you out, to support you? And if they didn't, what do you think they should have been doing that would have helped you make this process a little easier of applying to college and school?
Yeah, I was totally in the dark. First of all, I was undocumented, so nobody knew about my situation, which made it a little bit harder. But, you know, I think institutions have, you know, they should look out for students who are, you know, come from an underrepresented background, who know that you know, the struggle is there. And, you know, I remember, and it wasn't easy, and I'm glad even this conversation right here is so helpful, because, I mean, I remember in high school, you know, the Bridges program in Miami was really great, but I remember trying to get into the business school, crying because I couldn't get through calculus and I didn't have money for a tutor like my roommate, and it was a school that people were well off. And I just remember crying, and I had to drop the class. I had to drop calculus because I didn't have that help. And, you know, I think the library had this thing where they had these like free, what's it called when people help you with specific courses? Tutors. I was thinking of the Spanish word. Tutors, you know, those were all booked up. And so when you don't have the financial support, you can't get that help. And so I think, you know, institutions, if they really care about helping and wanting their minority students to be able to achieve, they have to think of the barriers that goes with it. You know, we think about how we grow up, you know, in middle school and high school. Like my parents were never there to show me, you know, how to do my math homework or my English homework. And I had to work really hard just to get like a B, you know? And so it starts at the beginning. It starts in early education. And I have interviewed Eva Longoria for this event, and she has a great program that is basically a program to help educate parents on how they can help their kids, especially for those working parents that have like 2 and 3 jobs like my parents did. But in high school, I didn't have that extra support. I didn't have that counselor that I could go to and kind of, ask for help for college. I will say my counselor did nominate me for the Bridges program, which was the program at Miami University who looked for kind of lower income or underrepresented minorities who were high achieving at school and were involved in extracurriculars. So the guidance counselor did see something in me and offered me the ability to, be part of this program. And I think more of that is super important. How can we engage our students or the people in our organization in conversations that they would not normally be involved in? Even if we expand this to the workplace, it's like diversity and inclusion, all those departments, what do those mean in the age of Black Lives Matter? How do we have authentic conversations where they actually, bring people to the table in a way that gives them, resources and gives them a platform and a voice? So that for me I think is something really important. And it starts at the beginning. By the time I was in college, I could have used that help before I got there. So there's tons that can be done to help support minorities.
Yeah, no, I agree. I work with a lot of children, immigrant children here in Ohio, and I see how they have to struggle to just figure out how the system works, how the school works. So yeah, help from the beginning will help people to even get to college. So along those lines, I wanted to ask you if you have any advice for, immigrant children, especially undocumented children who want to go to higher education, who want to go to college. Because applying is complicated, and then having to navigate all that, particularly if their parents don't know how the system works either. So what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think start in your local community. So ask friends, talk, sit down and talk to your guidance counselor. I think that if I might have been a little bit more vocal to him, he probably would have helped me a little bit. But I was just, I felt like I was in this alone, and that I had to, find a way by myself. But, more and more nowadays, there are those resources available for you. But, it's something that you do have to seek out, because unfortunately, some places just don't have those opportunities that are, or those systems that are, being spread out evenly to help people that need it. And so I would say, nowadays it is accessible. I know we talk about, the financial part of it, which is such a big hurdle, right? It's like, okay, yeah, we have to talk about all these like systemic things where it's hard to apply and it's hard to figure out what school I want to, but like the big thing is like, okay, how do I afford it? And I think that if I would have let myself be guided by the full reality of the situation, which was, we didn't have money to get even through the first year, right? Like, you gotta start thinking, you gotta start taking the big problem for that, for me was, how am I going to be able to afford this, and break it down to however it looks like in your situation. Like if you're a junior in high school, even if you're a junior in college and you're trying to prepare for the real world, like what are the $10 a week that you can put aside? Like start saving up in little ways. What are the gigs that we can do? Like, what can you do? Translating work at home? Go to Fiverr.com. I mean, so that's what I'm talking about, is finding small opportunities, because those small opportunities will all kind of accumulate to one solution, right? So I think, take advantage of the resources around you. Talk to your friends. Go to your local library. These are the things that I'm talking about. Like, local support, local resources. We don't really think about these things, but if we just dig a little bit, those things are there. So guidance counselor, and then if you're able to, I think one of the things that helped me so much is do a campus visit. That was something that really helped me, just being immersed and seeing yourself physically in a space that you wouldn't have normally thought about yourself in, and that your parents would have never imagined for you to be in. That helps, because it brings that kind of like physical reality to the front. And so once we start imagining ourselves and we kind of take little steps to get there, it makes the whole kind of like big question mark a whole lot bearable.
Yeah, I think we're almost running out of time, and we have some questions. I have somebody else wants to know, similar to the question I just asked, but they want to know, how do you find a network? Because, a lot of times, you get jobs through networks, and you mentioned that before, you didn't have a network. You had to kind of just apply to everything until, kind of you found the internship. So people are trying, like somebody wants to know if you had any advice on how to find a network, that will connect you to jobs opportunities.
You got to immerse yourself, right? The network's not going to come to you. You got to immerse yourself. And I knew that. That's why I wanted to be in New York, because I thought, okay, what is the type of work that I want to do, and who are the people that I can learn from and that I can connect with? So it's about, first of all, identifying what is that environment, what is that skill set, what is that work that you want to do, even if you don't have those things, right? Or even if you don't have the access to those things, but start imagining it for yourself, identify it, then strategize how you can get there, right? And I think that nowadays, this is something that was not so readily available. LinkedIn, Twitter, these things, Instagram, if you're in a creative field, like you can reach out to people in a way that, grows your network and grows kind of that professional kind of, network in a way where it's more accessible to you. You don't have to, spend 5 years in the workplace, getting to know everybody the way that we used to several years ago. You can do this online. It's just the approach is super important. We actually have tons of advice here on how to approach somebody. And I don't know if we have time, but maybe I can kind of quickly, I don't know if we have time to sort of explain, my advice on how to effectively reach out to somebody, even on social media.
If you just a couple minutes, yeah, we can do that.
Well, I think the first of all is to identify what value you can bring to them, right? And even if you're young, even if you're a college student, reaching out to somebody, being active on liking their stuff on Instagram or on LinkedIn, and then connecting with them and showing them that you have seen their stuff, that you have written what they have posted, or even if something out in the internet world connects you to them, or, reminds you of them, maybe send them that link and then say, I know you must be, really busy, but I would love to see if you have, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to chat about your experience. I think it would be really valuable, and always tie in a personal sort of connection, whether it's you've gone to the same college, or maybe you have somebody in common, or maybe it's the work that they do or a piece that they've written. Find a connecting factor. And once you focus on authentically fostering and cultivating these different relationships, you'll see that your networks will grow, and grow. And going to your question about finding a mentor, I think of Mika, who was one of the people that took my career to the next level. She was a little bit more than a mentor. She was a sponsor, right? She was the one that gave me opportunities. But I had to work really hard to earn her respect and earn her trust. And I think if you're a young person and you are, looking for opportunities to expand and to get to that next level of your career, finding an ally is super important. And I talk about the relationship Mika and I had and how it evolved to kind of a collaboration that we have now with the book and all these different projects. But it wasn't like that at the beginning. At the beginning, I was fetching her coffee at NBC, right? I was doing all these menial things that made her life easier. And remember, there was tons of people rotating in and out, like production assistants, pages, coordinators, and they, little people remembered them. So I had to find a way to distinguish myself. And I didn't have experience in production media. So I made sure to do the one thing that I could do the best and better than anybody else, which was getting her coffee. And I would sit outside of Starbucks like 10 minutes before it opened, like banging on the door so that they could give me the coffee. And the moment Mika walked into 30 Rock at 3:45 a.m., that I would have the coffee, super hot in her hand so that she could get to the makeup room and start, get that coffee so that her day could start. Very menial, very silly example, but it was really important. 2 years later, it wasn't until 2 years later that I came out to her with my story, the fact that I was undocumented and all of the struggles and things I had to do. And I talk about that pitch I gave her on the plane ride, and it was based on my story. And that's how the book happened. That's how everything else happened. And so very long-winded answer, but I think you start small and then you find a way to become indispensable to the person that you are, you're working for, or the person that can sponsor you.
It's amazing. Your story is so inspiring, and I'm really glad that you agreed to come today. I think a lot of people will get a lot of ideas on how, how to continue with their education, and hopefully they see that there is hope. Because I think that's one of the things that a conference was about. We just don't want to talk about the issues and the problems, but we also want to give people hope that some of these things can be solved and that we can work together to bring change. So we're really glad that you are here with us today. I think we are done with questions for you. We are going to move on to somebody else. Daniela, if you want to stay, but if not,
Great.
she might
Thank
leave
you.
us.
And I just want to say thank you so much. And for people that want to stay in touch, I love hearing from you guys. I'm in social media at @dpierrebravo. I'll write it on the comments. And for any mentors or mentees, like I mentioned, I am growing right now a platform. It's going to be live in a couple of weeks. It's called Accesso Community, and it connects mentors with mentees in the early and middle stages of a career. So if you're interested, please reach out to me, whether you're a mentor or mentee, and I hope to hear from you soon. And thank you guys so much for this really conversation. Thank you, Maria. Appreciate it.
It's amazing.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, so now we have Emily. Emily Brown. She is an attorney at Advocates for Basic Legal Equality, ABLE. So she's one of my coworkers. She does immigration work. She also does civil rights and federal litigation. So she's here to talk to us today about some of the work that she has been doing in the past couple of years with immigrant clients. Emily, you have the floor.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you to Maria, and also to Yolanda and Lynn and everyone else who put together this fantastic convening. So after hearing such an inspirational story from an Ohioan about what it was like to grow up here as an immigrant, I'm going to start off with giving us a brief overview on a more macro level of who immigrants in Ohio are, and then talk about some of the issues immigrant communities face here, focusing particularly on the legal front of things. I'm not going to get into federal immigration policy or the state of immigration law more generally, because you'll be hearing about that in future panels. But I am going to talk about some Ohio specific issues. So first of all, Ohio, so about 4.8% of Ohioans are foreign born, and that's a number that's smaller than the US nationally, but it is a huge increase over the last 20 years. So Ohio has really changed and is continuing to change. It's about a 63% increase over the last 20 years in the number of Ohioans who were born in other countries. The other thing to remember about the Ohio immigrant community is that it is extremely diverse. Around the most recent numbers from a couple years ago are around 16% African, 43% Asian, 8% European, and 19% Latin American. So you really see, and I think this panel also demonstrates that immigrants in Ohio are from everywhere and have all sorts of lived experiences. Another common sort of fact or misconception that many people have about immigrants is that they are all in low-wage jobs or all have low education levels, and that could not be further from the case. In Ohio, actually, the average immigrant has a higher level of education than a native-born citizen, but at the same time, the immigrant community in Ohio has higher poverty rates, lower incomes, and lack of access to health insurance. So we really do have a diverse immigrant community with many different kinds of experiences. Anywhere from, refugees from Somalia or Bhutan to farm workers who are Mexican-American guest workers, or Mexican-Americans who live in Florida and come up here for the season, without which our agriculture industry would not even exist, and it's our state's largest industry. So we really have quite a variety of immigrant experiences, but there are some common issues that are sort of facing the immigrant community writ large. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about those issues. And because this panel, or this convening in general, is supposed to focus on what we can do to improve the lives of immigrant communities in Ohio and to sort of fight back against some of the poisonous policies that are coming down from the federal level and the state level, I'm going to talk about some areas where there is room for advocacy and change, both on the legal front and the organizing front and that kind of thing. So first of all, a huge issue facing Ohio immigrants is discriminatory policing. And we see this at the state, local, and federal levels. A little known fact about Ohio is that we're actually considered a border state because we share a border with Canada. Even though there is very little unauthorized immigration coming in from Canada, because we are technically a border state, that means that we have a border patrol station, and it's a very active border patrol station in northern Ohio, in the Sandusky Bay area, sort of northwest, north central Ohio, which is essentially allowed to police 100 miles into the interior of the state from the northern border. So it doesn't quite reach to Columbus, but it affects northern Ohio in a really big way. And essentially what that means is it has led to a huge, since it opened in 2009, that border patrol station, it's led to a huge surge in discriminatory policing. The numbers show that it's almost solely Latinx immigrants who get pulled over and stopped on the highways in northern Ohio, and that leads to apprehending undocumented immigrants and people being put into detention and removal proceedings. So we have both the Border Patrol, and then also we have a very active and aggressive ICE office, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and sort of buttressing those federal agencies, we have state and local law enforcement agencies who unfortunately collaborate with those federal agencies in apprehending undocumented immigrants and putting them into the removal system. And so this is an issue that is important for us as Ohioans to all understand, because we do have the opportunity at the state and local level to try to put pressure on law enforcement to change some of their practices and collaborations with federal agencies that are leading to families being broken up and immigrants being detained and deported. And this is something, given this summer and the rise of the Black Lives Matter protests that were especially dominant this summer, issues around discriminatory policing are getting a lot of attention right now. And we need to understand that there's sort of a broad spectrum of the way that this can affect immigrant communities and non-immigrant communities alike. Secondly, there's a number of sort of unfair laws in Ohio that have hurt immigrants and are hurting immigrants, both documented and undocumented. So I'm going to use as an example issues with lack of access to driver's license and ID cards. And this can be, so first of all, undocumented immigrants in Ohio are prohibited from getting a driver's license at all. And this is, many states do allow undocumented immigrants to have access to driver's licenses, which has been shown to lead to, better, safer roads for everybody, because fewer uninsured, unlicensed drivers are on the road. It also gives people opportunities to, if you have a license and if you have an ID card, you're able to do so many other things besides driving, like opening a bank account, getting a job, many of the things that, we take for granted all the time that we pull out our driver's licenses for. You can't access that at all if you are undocumented. And then even within the immigrant community in Ohio that does have immigration status, there are still many barriers to licensing and identification. And so one example is we recently won a case at ABLE again, vehicles. There's actually two cases affecting two different groups of immigrants. One was refugees who have been here longer than 2 years and have not gotten their green cards yet, were essentially barred from getting a driver's license. And we won that, and now they can get a driver's license, and that probably affects somewhere around 1,000 refugees in any given year in Ohio. And this is, a group of people who oftentimes they don't have access to ID from their home countries even, because they were refugees when they came here. So it's a huge issue for people, and it affects their ability to integrate into American life and to have access to jobs and transportation and all of that. Secondly, there's a group of children, 16 and 17-year-olds, since 16 and 17-year-olds in Ohio can drive, 16 and 17-year-olds whose parents were undocumented. And because Ohio has a requirement that parents co-sign a driver's license application, the BMV was refusing to let any 16 or 17-year-old, even if she was a US-born citizen, to get a driver's license because their parents couldn't co-sign. And so we sued the BMV and also won that case. And these cases were brought by undocumented parents and their children here in Ohio who, very bravely put their names on a lawsuit and represented a whole class of what we think is probably around 3,000 kids to be able to fight for their kids to have the same rights as any US born citizen would have. And so these are just sort of examples of the ways in which state agencies can have a huge impact on the lives of immigrants and in ways that, we as Ohioans can advocate for policy changes in these areas, can do lawsuits if that's appropriate. But we also have to acknowledge, given the political state of our state right now, we do have to fight back a lot on affirmative sort of attacks on immigrants. And so we're often in a defensive posture. And one example of this is every year, seemingly, or every couple years, the state legislature tries to ban undocumented workers from the workers' compensation program, which no other state in the country does. I mean, this is really on the fringe in terms of right-wing economic policy. And essentially, it makes workplaces unsafe for everyone if employers know that they can hire undocumented workers and then not have to pay workers' compensation when they get hurt. They have no incentive to have safe workplaces. If anything, COVID has brought this issue even more to the forefront because we see, for instance, huge COVID outbreaks in meatpacking plants. That's been happening in Ohio and other places. Meatpacking, chicken processing, the Dole plant in Springfield, people may have heard of. There were hundreds of workers there that contracted COVID, and many of them are undocumented. And if we can't incentivize employers to make their workplaces safe from COVID, they just won't do it. And they'll continue to exploit their workers. And it's really immigrant workers who are on the forefront of that type of exploitation. And that's why, it's so critical that we fix that problem. So there are a bunch of other issues that I would love to get into if we had all day, but essentially what I really want people to understand is that at the state and local level, we do have a really big way, we can really influence state and local policies in ways that benefit immigrants, even when from the federal level, things seem to be somewhat out of our control until election day, of course. But we do have the ability, especially even at the city level, obviously things are hostile at the state level, but at the city level, there's a lot of innovative work being done around the state, doing everything from wage theft commissions to help low-wage workers, to immigration legal defense funds, like the one in Columbus, to fighting to try to break the link between city police departments and ICE and that collaboration. And so there's many things that we can all do in our cities and towns around the state to try to improve things for all immigrant communities in Ohio.
Thank you, Emily. So I just wanted to ask you a question because you gave a lot of information. So I'm hoping that people can learn a lot from that. So I guess based on what you were saying, that local communities, local, government can do things to help the immigrant communities. What are things that you think people can do to help with that? I mean, there's city council, and then there's, different areas, and, what is an advice that you would give to people who want to get involved in trying to, change some of the local policies?
So, yeah, I would say that there's a lot of things that can be done at the city council and mayor level. There are, many cities around Ohio have started forming like welcoming initiatives and are thinking about ways that they can help the immigrant community by funding, things that are a priority for the community, funding legal services, funding other things that help the immigrant community, like access to social services or filling in the gaps. I mean, we saw one of the great injustices of the CARES Act was that stimulus money was not available, not only to undocumented immigrants, but also to anyone in a family. If you file as married filing jointly and you have a US citizen wife and an undocumented husband, the whole family is ineligible for the $1,200, which is just insane and mind-boggling. There were some cities and states around the country, I believe Minneapolis was the first one to do this, that basically passed their own fund that would act as a stimulus fund for those who were left out of the federal priorities. So there's ways that cities can do things like that, when the federal government, sort of abdicates its responsibility. There are, anyone who lives in any city or town, you have a local school board, and the local school board sets policy for schools. And I know we're going to have a panel later this month on education in particular, but in many towns in Ohio, there are newly arrived non-English speaking children coming into schools, and the schools are not really ready for them and are not fulfilling their requirements under federal law to educate those kids and to communicate with those parents in their native language. And so you can be a part of advocating on the local level with your school board for improving educational access for English language learner kids. And then, like I mentioned before, I think really advocacy around policing is so important right now, particularly because there's a lot of energy from that across multiple communities, but really getting the police department to commit to policies that do not allow them to just call up Immigration and Customs Enforcement or Border Patrol every time they encounter someone who's driving without a license or someone who's unable to produce an Ohio license showing that they have authorization. So all of those things, I think, are things that can happen at a local level.
Yeah, that's great. We have one question. I'm not really sure from the audience if you know the answer to this, but somebody wants to know how COVID has impacted H-2A workers in the state, since we've had so many outbreaks in some of the farms.
Yeah, that's a good question. I am not super familiar with how H-2A workers in Ohio have been affected by COVID, other than in the way that sort of farm workers more broadly have been affected by COVID, which is that, as we all know, farm workers are essential workers. They've been keeping food in our grocery stores since the beginning of this pandemic. And the safety measures that have been put in place in Ohio are not, there's not additional safety measures that we really need to be seeing to protect undocumented workers, to allow them to socially distance. You often have like a carload, the grower will take a huge truckload of workers out to the field all together. They're not able to socially distance. There's a lot of problems. In Ohio, we have agricultural labor camps where people that are here on a temporary basis, H-2A workers and also domestic workers that have come up from the South, they live in very tight quarters in camps, shared bathrooms, all of that. And so, we really need additional social distancing and hygiene measures in place to protect those workers. And that would apply as well to H-2A workers. The other thing that the Trump administration is trying to decrease the minimum wage for H-2A workers. Each state has a set minimum that they have to pay H-2A workers, as well as any US workers that they would hire to be H-2A workers. And so the Trump administration is essentially trying to lower everybody's wages right now, which is the exact opposite of what you want to do in a pandemic when you're asking these essential workers to continue picking the food that we want to be on our table. And just to back up, I realize not everybody might know what an H-2A worker is. So sorry, I should have said that at the beginning, but an H-2A worker is a guest worker who comes here on a specific visa that is tied to a specific employer. So they would come to work at a specific farm in, say, Northwest Ohio, and they would be here for a certain number of months, usually just the length of the growing season, and then they would return, usually to Mexico, where most of them are from. They would return to Mexico and then maybe come back the following season, but they are a temporary worker. They're not here for a unlimited period of time.
Yeah, so I have one final question for you. Somebody wants to know if there are any opportunities right now for them to get involved in the kind of work that you do, that Able does.
So yeah, I mean, it depends on where you live and what you want to do. So it's hard to give an overall answer. You can email me. I'm Emily Brown, ebrown at ablelaw.org if you're interested more in getting involved with the work we do, and I'd be happy to connect you. It really does depend on what part of the state you're in, but there are a lot of dynamic and active organizations around the state that are doing advocacy at the local level. And like I said, that can range from everything to policing, to fighting wage theft, to organizing around language access. There's DACA organizing opportunities, all that kind of stuff. So feel free to be in contact with me, and I can give you some more direction based on where you live and what you want to do.
Thank you so much, Emily, for agreeing to be in this panel. And thank you for all the work you do. I'm really proud that I'm your coworker. I see the work that you've done, and she really does do amazing work for immigrants in Ohio. So thank you for being here today. We are now going to move on to Cynthia.
Thank you, Maria. I am so excited to be a part of this. My name is Cynthia Bukira. I am originally from Uganda, and I'm 18 years old. I came into the United States through the Refugee Resettlement Program in 2019, which is last year. This is for those who don't know what this program is, it's a program where the United States handpicks on cases of people who flee their countries for various reasons and can't go back. Currently, I'm a senior at Centennial High School. I also have a part-time job, and I'm an intern at Columbus Facial Plastics at the Sullivan Center. I also volunteer at Heart to Heart Food Pantry, and I'm a speaker and part of the Community Refugee and Immigration Services Speakers Bureau. I am also aspiring to be a freshman at The Ohio State University come next year. Just a little bit of background about me. I was born in a family of 4, and I am the second born. I grew up in a small town in Kampala, went to the country's best schools, and always valued my education. My mother was loving and caring, and my father was sometimes caring, but generally abusive. We lived a normal life until my parents got divorced, which later resulted in the burning of my mother with acid. She had to flee the country for her own safety. I lived in constant fear that I'll never see my mother again, and the trauma of having to see my mother in tears all the time, and a body full of blisters and wounds. My father and relatives were not supportive because they hated my mother. And my father always threatened to get us out of school and reminded us of how worthless we were because our mother had left and we had nobody else to turn to. In order to escape our father's threats, we went to Kenya. Life in Kenya was so devastating. We had no option to turn back and did not know what to do next. We lived among strangers, did not know the language they spoke, and we did not go to school. Our life was in shatters. Our life was in limbo. We lived in fear that the American immigration would turn its back on us, and fear that we would never get to see our mom again or even go back to school. After my mother's persistent advocacy, together with Church World Service and Community Refugee and Immigration Services, we were able to be reunited in June last year. My family's story also featured in a documentary on Netflix called Immigration Nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing your story. So you've been here in Ohio for less than 2 years now, and you're in high school.
Yeah. Yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit of some of the challenges that you've had since coming to the United States and starting school here?
My biggest challenge was being alone and lonely. I left my friends in Uganda, and it was really hard to make friends here. And since I was new, I had to take up 2 classes in 1 year. I had to do sophomore and junior year the same year. So I had online school and the normal courses in school. So yeah, it was really hard to socialize and get involved because I had school, I had to catch up. I did not have an education for 1 year, and that was really hard on me to adjust to the American system. Yeah, I wasn't used to that. And then I also I lost my self-esteem for some reason. You know how I have an accent. So I was always in fear of being misinterpreted, misunderstood. Like, did I say something wrong? Like that confusion. Yeah. And then also I did not know about the American system, of course. Like in February, it was time, like they talked about the ACT. Yes, they registered me. They told me about it, but I did not really know the significance of it. So I couldn't study, but I went for it. Like I had all the hope. I trusted in God that whatever I'm gonna do, like he's gonna help me get through this. I just went for the test. I did it. Of course, I didn't get the best score, but at least I did the exam. Yeah. And I'm also a first generation student. My parents did not go to school here. The college search is really, it's a struggle. Like it's really hard to navigate it because I don't know anything about it. Yes, my school counselor does a great job of telling me what I'm supposed to do, but at times it's confusing because it's new and then somehow I've been in different systems. So it's really hard to understand and get everything done. Yeah. And then also, I'm this perfectionist. I want to be creme de la creme, like get everything done, be the best. So I found myself in a stage of depression where I was just always in my books, like all night. I would stay up all night to study. Yeah, it was really hard on me. Yeah.
So what has something that your school has done to help you support you through this, to help you understand the system and figure out how to, the application for school, like college works and all that?
My school has been really supportive. First of all, it's really diverse. I found students who are like me from where I come from. Like I got some people who talked to me about how to navigate, how to cope, and they helped me through it. My guidance counselor has been really helpful. Yeah, and I've also learned that in order to get help, you have to reach out and tell someone like what you are going through so that they can know how to help you. Yeah, I have learned that. And they're being really helpful. Yeah.
Um, so since you haven't been here for very long, and I remember when I first came here, it was a little bit of a cultural shock. What has been something that since you came to live in Ohio that was like a little shocking at first, like that you've had to get used to it, whether it's good or bad,
Wow. So my first cultural shock was children talking back at teachers. I could not imagine. Like that does not happen where I come from. That was a big cultural shock. Like the children have the audacity. Like, yeah. And then also police officers in school, that was really scary. It made me feel like this place is not safe. Why does the police have to be here? Yeah. And then also I was so surprised by the way guns are everywhere, like in the stores, stuff like that. Yeah, people own guns. That doesn't happen where I come from. And yeah, the technology also, because in our classes we have computers, but we have laboratories where they keep the computers and it's only accessible to people who like do computer courses. Yeah, so we don't use computers as much where I come from. And then coming to the United States where everything is on the computer, everything like technology, smart boards, that was a shift. Yeah, it was a drift.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally understand the one about police and security guards at school, because that was one of my first shocks the first day of school in the US. Um,
Yeah.
so you mentioned that you were part of a documentary on Netflix. How was that like? What did you learn from the experience?
At that time when it was being filmed, I was I was like I felt like this was my only hope of getting to be with my mom. I felt like these people are going to help us spread awareness and maybe tell someone out there who's going to be able to help us reach our mom. And I felt like this was my only hope. It was a bit hard to share my story, but I felt like I have to do this because if I don't say my story, how are people going to know? Like, yeah, it's the only way people are going to actually get to know what I'm going through, and maybe someone will be able to help me. I felt, yeah, it gave me a little bit of hope, because at that time I was really distressed. I was in a country, a strange country. I had never been there before. And then also I wasn't legal there. We just went there. We didn't have documents like in Kenya. So I felt like maybe finally I'm going to be out of prison, something like that. Yeah. And then when I look back at it right now, I feel like I'm proud of myself. I told my story, and I know it's going to help somebody out there. Somebody out there is getting inspiration from it. And I feel proud that I am able to inspire someone through my story. And that makes me very happy that I can do that for someone.
Yeah, actually, from what you're saying, we have some questions from attendees. I know I wasn't going to do this with everybody, but they kind of go along with what you're saying. Somebody wants to know how you kept the hope alive while you were waiting in Kenya to be reunited with your mom.
It was really hard. I went to church every single day. I was just like holding onto hope that God is there for me and God will always be there for me. I just prayed all the time. Actually, sometimes I lost hope, but I just had to keep positive and hope for the best, because it was hard. Yeah.
I also have somebody who wants to know, what advice would you give to people who are in similar situations to yours? And also sort of similar along those lines, kind of like some ways that you could have been supported. So sorry, I'm getting the question confused. So no, like, so just tell us, like, what advice would you give to people that are in similar circumstances than you were?
Like right now?
Yeah, like how to
Right now?
get through it. Yeah.
Okay, first of all, I think it's important for you to embrace your culture, embrace your values and what you believe in. Don't try to change yourself for someone else. It's important that you know that it's a phase of your life, and you have some time, you're going to go through it, and it's going to be for the best. Like, work hard every single day just to make a difference from yesterday. Don't look at the long term. Just look at, what do I have to get done today and then tomorrow, and like make a progress of like a daily progress. Don't try to be too hard on yourself. That's what I think. I do my stuff on a daily basis. Like, how am I going to make today better than yesterday? Yeah, just look at it in that perspective of changing something daily. Like, do something and grab every opportunity. Just grab every opportunity and try to speak to people, talk to different people, tell them your situation. Maybe there is always someone, and people, I'm so happy that people are always willing to help as long as you ask. And yeah, try to talk to someone, put yourself out there and grab opportunities that you qualify for. Yeah.
So, I mean, you've shared your story, through the Netflix documentary and now today. So you do this a lot. What is something that you want people to take away from your story and from not just the struggles to get to the United States, but also since you've been here? What are things that you want people to know about?
Can you hear me? Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah.
I did not get your question properly. I'm having a problem with my speaker.
Okay. So I was asking that since you've shared your story about being a refugee, both the story coming to the United States and then since you've been here, what is something that you want people to take away from your story, that people want to know about refugees and new immigrants to this country? I think we're losing.
Having technical.
Yeah, I think we're having some audio issues. Well, let's see. I think what we can do is maybe people can keep putting questions in the chat for Cynthia, and then we can move on to Lisa. And then later on at the end, we can go back to Cynthia if there's any more questions. So, Lisa. So Lisa is a Filipino-American writer, poet, and editor of Dear Sisters, Letters from Survivors of Sexual Violence, and also The Rumpus online. And she's here to tell us her story and the work that she does.
Well, first, thank you so much to all of the coordinators, the sponsors, for pulling this event together. And thank you for inviting me and sharing space. I'm really honored to be here. My name is Lisa, and I am a writer and editor. I'm a contributing editor at Catapult magazine. I'm a senior features editor for The Rumpus Online, and I edited an anthology, Dear Sister, Letters from Survivors of Sexual Violence, which is a collection of letters, poetry, and prose from survivors of sexual violence written to other survivors, primarily from the perspective of survivors and women of color. I did a lot of like thinking about how to condense my story, you know, and like what are the most salient things to share. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. My parents are Filipino immigrants, and I really was moved by so many parts of Cynthia's story and so many elements of Daniela's story, even though migrant, immigrant, and refugee experiences are distinct and clearly have like their own detail. There's just a growing empathy if you've experienced growing up in Ohio as othered in some way. And so what I wanted to focus on, you know, as a writer, as an editor, is the ways that immigration and coming from an immigrant family, you know, shaped me. My family, you know, we're originally from the East Coast. We grew up in, you know, right outside New York. And when I was 8 years old, you know, my dad, he just announced, yeah, we're moving to Ohio. I was like, where? I'm like, where are we going? And, you know, I remember, you know, we moved to Massillon, Ohio, which was Northeast Ohio, like this small town, like an hour from Cleveland, which I didn't even know what Cleveland was. All I knew was New York. I was just like, what is this Ohio business? And I remember moving and, you know, as a child, like really having a very, very difficult time adjusting to the Ohio life. Like there are cornfields everywhere. Just like it was a predominantly white area. People that I'd met, you know, had no awareness around different forms of Asian backgrounds. Like everybody thought I was all different things. Like it was like an assault every time someone's like, oh, are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? Are you Korean? Are you this? And I'm like, no, I'm like none of those things. And it was, you know, looking back, like it was very difficult for me to make that transition to Ohio. And I believe I write a lot about this. Like I have a love-hate relationship with Ohio because of it. And I just want to be transparent about that. Like in many ways, these are my roots. Like this is my home. But I've left Ohio like 5 times in adulthood, and I've lived in Boston, I lived in New York, and it's seated in this very early experience of not fitting in. And coming from an immigrant family, I think if anyone out there, you know, identifies as being a second generation, there's unique and distinct experiences of not fitting in, that you have to learn so many different worlds in order to navigate school, home, social life. My family was very Filipino Catholic, very conservative. There were all of these lines over propriety, over cultural acceptance, over assimilation that I only had language for later on in life. But very early on, it just was Ohio. to me. Like, this was Ohio, where we're not accepted, where people don't understand who we are. And I wasn't fluent, in Tagalog. I wasn't fluent in any other language but English. And I had so many, buried feelings over, people not accepting me for the person that I was as a whole, as a child, and wanting to be a part of, all American life, and always navigating this sense of shame, of being racialized. And it taught me very, very, very early on to be a listener of political stories, beginning with my own. My mother saw how I was 8 years old when we moved to Ohio, and I wasn't talking very much. It was just such a difficult move for me. And my mom gave me my first journal, and she's like, just write your feelings down. And I identified a bit with what Daniela was saying. My parents, it's like, don't dwell on it, like, don't worry about it, like, just, smile, be positive, things are going to be better. And that first journal that I had when I was 8, when I look back on it now, it's really interesting to look back at my writing. It's all about fleeing. It's all about, wanting to return to a place of normalcy. Where do I belong? Who am I? Everyone here is white. Like, I don't understand how they don't understand me. And negotiating so early on in life, these questions of identity, these questions of where do I belong? And fast forward, decades and decades of, pondering, these themes. It's really moved me into a career that, holds all of my passion for political storytelling. I just firmly believe that, as Cynthia was, beautifully saying, if you have a narrative, if you have a personal narrative, in my opinion, it is one of the most powerful tools for creating change in the world. And I think it has the potential to create policy changes. That's why we listen to personal stories in the judicial system. It's why we are always listening to, like, what was the impact of a policy, or what is the true story of how something is experienced at a community or family level when we're talking about borders and citizenship and laws and deportation. What are we really talking about when we're talking about costs of families and of lives? I'm a firm believer that there's a place in the judicial system, but I've made my home within the literary and media community. And as a writer, as an editor, I'm constantly looking for storytelling that reminds me a bit of what I struggled with as a kid. I love stories that come from immigrant, migrant, and refugee women. I'm endlessly fascinated by hearing and exploring how these particular kinds of personalist political stories can be shared. And so one of the things that I did, it doesn't specifically address immigration, but it was early on in my career. I was working as a legal and medical advocate for survivors of sexual violence. And it was a pretty brutal experience, in the sense of constantly hearing all of these stories of violence, and how survivors had to negotiate so many laws, so much red tape. And I worked with survivors who were Native American. And so we had to look beyond, the American laws and look at, tribal laws, and just there was so much complication with trying to get a definition of justice, depending on where a survivor was coming from. I worked with immigrant and migrant and refugees who culturally were not encouraged to report, had to find justice and healing in alternative ways. And that was the root for wanting to create this book, this anthology, in which I believed, it gave a bit of a glimpse of how rich storytelling could be for others. And so that was my first kind of effort to put something out in the literary world that really put political storytelling as basically as an offering for others. And so where I'm at now is I work with a lot of writers from all over the world. I'm just really attracted to stories of particularly from immigrant and migrant women who are trying to make a life in America, who are redefining what does it mean to navigate the culture, to navigate the Trump administration, what does it mean to navigate an everyday identity inside America today. So that is where I'm at, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. So you talk a lot about, highlighting, the voices of women, especially writers who are immigrants, so like marginalized voices. Why is that so important to you?
Well, I think I've been an editor for about 15 years. And the majority of, I specialize within creative nonfiction, memoir, essays, prose, and poetry. And I believe that the potential for a lot of these stories can change, perspective. I think it's world building. I think it has the potential to shift political ideologies of everyday people. And it's important to me to get to the stories that are rarely told. It is very difficult. I think Daniela gave really rich detail how difficult it is to break into media and into publishing. If you don't have the pedigree, if you don't have the right education, if you don't have the right name, if you don't have, the right background. And a lot of it is many writers, they don't know what to do. They don't know even how to tell the story. And the process that I see in the publishing industry also, it's not exactly the most friendly toward people who don't know what they're doing. People want seasoned writers. They want people who know the system, who know how to make editorial, feedback. It's an industry that has such potential, but there's so much power dynamic, and it doesn't do justice to the rich storytelling of immigrant, migrant, and refugee writers. It just doesn't. It's important to me because I believe that that's where not only like just politically, I think that those are stories need to be told, but I just am entertained by those stories. I mean, just at a superficial, like I'm fascinated, just by Daniela's story, by Cynthia's story. I'm like, it has all of the elements of what we're looking for, of like, what does it mean to be alive today? What does it mean to struggle today? And those are in my opinion, the marginal voices are the ones that have all of those elements. And those are the ones that are rarely told.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're starting to see more stories from a lot of immigrant women of color, and it's sad that it's taking this long for that to happen, but it's great that it is starting to happen. So besides those issues, I mean, you were saying how you write and you really think a lot about identity, and I think as myself as an immigrant and people from immigrant families like yourself, that's an issue that is always there for us because we have like different identities, right? We have, like you were saying, the one at home, the one at work, the one at school. How have you been able to navigate the multiple identities in your life?
I think it's
able to.
I think I'm still trying to figure that out. I think that it's always evolving. I think that particularly under COVID, it's really difficult to navigate identity when I'm cut off from, I can't physically be with my parents who are aged and their health is compromised. And the primary reason I live in Columbus that I'm here is to be with my parents. They're in their last decade of living, and I want to be here and be present. And it's difficult. It's very, very difficult to feel rooted to your family when you physically can't touch them. I can't physically hold them or be with them. Juggling all of the identities as a working mother. I have two children, who are 10 and 5. I'm going to be totally transparent. I mean, it's a circus every day. And you never know, you never know what the primary show is going to be in the circus every day. So I think juggling all of these identities, the goal for me is integration. It's, when as a memoirist, I look back at different parts of my life and I see how as a child of immigrants, I was often performing for others. I was succeeding and achieving and being rewarded for doing what other people told me to do. And I think as I navigate still multiple identities as a writer, as a mother, as a life partner, as an activist, I try to integrate all of the positive things that I learned growing up about strength and independence and perseverance into who I am now, today. And speaking out, like Cynthia said, if we don't use our voices and our stories to empower others, it's a lost opportunity.
Yes. And I wonder, as you were mentioning, there's not a large Asian community in Ohio. I'm not really familiar with the Filipino community in Columbus. I don't think there's a big one, if I'm not wrong. How do you keep that part of your heritage, of your Filipino culture alive? I know, for example, for me, I'm Colombian. To me, one of the ways that I connect is through music. I listen to a lot of music in Spanish. That's just one of the ways that I can do it from Ohio, right? What is something for you so that you're able to keep that part of your identity, rooted or alive in you being in Columbus?
One of the things that I'm trying to research and write into is the very particular experience that I had growing up, what I call as a diasporic writer, meaning, my parents left the Philippines, for economic reasons. They left the Philippines and came to America to support their families back home. I grew up in this idea that you make money, you create a career to take care of others, and you split that money across continents. I grew up as a child of immigrants thinking like, this is what you're supposed to do. You take care of everybody around you. And I just blanked out on the question because I just started thinking about my parents. I'm so sorry. Can you repeat the question one more time? I just want to make sure that I get to it because I know we're.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So it's more like, how do you keep connected to your Filipino roots in Columbus, especially now that you're saying that you're away from your parents, which I'm assuming a lot of times is our connection, from my mom, right? But now that you're even farther away from them because you can't be physically with them, how do you keep in that part of your? I think of it as feeding my identity in a way. So I wonder, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm sorry for that blank out. I think it was just my heart took over because I was thinking of my parents. I'm like, I really miss them. So apologies for that. But staying connected for me was really looking specifically at how I grew up without a strong Filipino community. I mean, we were in this small town, and I've had to really grow and deepen. What does it mean, to be a Filipino American? What does it mean to not have the community that I see, African American communities or the Latino community have? Sometimes I would just be jealous. I felt so alone growing up. I never had that, and I always wanted, that sense of community around me. And I had to really work and believe that I was Filipino enough just for who I am, and access to all of these things that my cousins who live in LA and New York, I didn't have that. So the question for me was, first believing, even as I don't speak Tagalog fluently, even as I don't have access to all of, Filipino studies because I didn't go to UCLA, or I don't have access to the bakeries, in New York that sell all of the things that are familiar to me. I don't have access to that. So what does it mean for me? It has always meant joining with other people of color and defining my identity by, truthfully, an arduous research kind of life of learning how to cook, learning phrases, teaching my kids how to speak, Tagalog, using those, those terms, those languages, so it's in their ear. And I think what's incredible is more and more, there are more Asian American and Pacific Islander communities springing up because of the political situation that are organizing. And I found activist communities and more Filipino people through that path. And so staying connected has always been engaging in politics. The more that I engage into feminism, the more that I engage in a political process, I found like-minded Filipinos, and that is what's rooted me to Ohio, and it's made living here possible.
But you also said that you've lived in a lot of places. So how's that compared? I mean, the good and the bad, I guess. I'm kind of curious because, in a way, like you're saying, your parents are here. So if you were in New York, you could get the bakeries, but you will be away from your parents. So how do you? I guess it goes back to how do you balance what part do you need to be more important? Do you need to be with like a city that has more Filipino people, or do you want to be close to your parents and then kind of learn to balance that out and find different ways? Because you've lived in a lot of places, so.
Yeah. Well, you could also ask my husband, and he said it. That question and has definitely like been a driver in our marriage and in our life. I've lived in a lot of places, kind of under the belief that I would feel better once I lived in New York. And we lived in New York, and we lived in Boston, and I lived in the Pacific Northwest, and I've flown to California more times than I can count. And I'm not gonna lie, it is like, I feel so alive there. I just feel seen. And also, ironically, I also love feeling invisible because there are other people that look like me. It isn't like a big deal to walk down the street and see other Filipino or other Pacific Islanders around. Like, that to me feels like a miracle. Like when that happens, I'm like, oh, this is so wonderful to be invisible because I just like blend in. But numerous times I had to ask myself, is this experience of walking down the street and being with other people of color parallel to the experience of being with my parents? My parents, God love, they love Ohio. Like they will root themselves. They want to be buried in Ohio. I'm just like, OMG, like why? Let's like go to LA. And like, no, we love Ohio. We love Northeast Ohio. We love the winters. I'm like, y'all, I don't know what that's about, but they love Ohio. And I had to make the decision, particularly when I became a mother. Like this is what it means for me to tether my children to Filipino culture, to like their immigrant experience. It was being close to them, and that was a negotiation and a compromise that I had to decide. Like, are my kids going to have a relationship to their grandparents by living on the coasts? They could, but it's going to be through Zoom, and it'll be through, holidays. But it was really difficult. So I made the decision, after I became a mom, I'm like, there's nothing that will compare to my children actually sitting next to my parents and hearing them exchange stories about what it was like living in the Philippines, what it was like immigrating to this country, the struggles, the racial discrimination that they faced. That's a whole other topic, was like navigating the education system, as immigrants, and getting me and my siblings through college. They weren't gonna, my kids aren't gonna hear that in a bakery. So I made that decision to live here for those years.
So kind of along those lines, and this is usually a hard question because I honestly can't even answer it for myself, but like, where is home? Then is it with your parents? Is it your parents who are technically your home in a way? Because I don't know that there's any one place where I truly feel like I belong anymore. I've lived in a couple different places too. So how do you feel like you have a home, or is it just kind of where your parents are? Like, is there one place where, of all the places you live, where you're like, I belong here, or do you feel like there's no one place?
I love the concept of home. I think that there are a lot of immigrant, migrant, and refugee writers who appropriately are obsessed with the concept. Like, what does it mean for any of us to say, I feel like I'm at home or I'm home? I actually just gave a talk about like the concept of home for me. And I don't want to dodge the question at all in a concrete way, but abstractly and truthfully, I just think that for immigrant and migrant people, the concept of home, the American concept of home, does not fit. And I think it splits our thinking in a way to choose. And to be honest, like if you look at how Filipinos are spread all over the world to do what they need to do to create enough income to sustain the economy of the the hundreds of islands that make up the country of the Philippines. It's literally in my blood to move. It's literally in my blood of my people to go where I need to go to make life happen. And I take that concept and that feels like home. Like knowing that it's in my blood, that it's okay, that I don't feel that I belong, that instead it's in my energy, it's in my spirit to make home where I go, to make communities where I go. And I try not to beat myself up over not having a concept of home the way I think most Americans think of home. I know now, like I'm in my early 40s, I'm, quite settled to say this, but home is within myself. I've lived, in so many places, in so many circumstances. Cultivating my identity is my home, and I can take that anywhere. So whatever life has thrown at me as a child, of immigrant parents to now as an adult, and taking care of my immigrant parents now, I know that home is within me. And there are many places that I feel comfortable and familiar, but the feeling of home is elusive to me.
Yeah, I totally understand that because I don't think that there's one. I think a lot of us, because we have so many different identities that are mixing, it's hard to find the one place where you're like, oh, this is the one. Yeah. I kind of, we're dealing with so much, not only with the political climate, but also, having to deal with all this that we're talking about, the different identities, the struggles where maybe you're in a place where you don't feel like you truly fit in, or, being away from relatives, because a lot of times immigrants might come to the country where maybe their immediate family, but the rest of their family are far away. So what is something that has helped you? I know the word self-care is used a lot, but something that has helped you, kind of navigate all this. And I know right now it's even more compounded because of COVID, but what is something that you can recommend to people, like that they can find a way to, go through all this stuff that's going on and kind of find a way to deal with the different, I think as immigrants, I think people who are from immigrant families, we get push and pull from a lot of different directions. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, for different reasons. So what would you recommend people to kind of how they should try to find their own identity? How do they should be figuring it out how in a way that is helpful to them to kind of looking within themselves. So I guess I'm just trying to, like, how would you recommend people to do that, have that conversations with themselves? If they're confused about their identity in their home, like what's something that you would recommend?
I think right now during COVID, I said this before, in our prep call, I think that the entire discourse around mental health is being rewritten. I think for anyone that, immigrant or non-immigrant, the whole process of being in one place and being forced to stay in your homes and not having access to things that have bolstered you before is devastating. I don't think that it can be overstated how difficult it is, particularly for immigrant kids, particularly for people where home is a complex place to be, and you're being forced either to reckon with issues of safety, issues of belonging, or feeling cut off maybe from the chosen family. Like there's a concept, it's an American concept, but one that I believe in is like that you get to choose who you feel safe with. You get to choose who you confide in. A lot of young kids right now are really struggling being cut off from their friends. And I don't think that that's a small thing at all. I think the first step is, I can only speak, like as a mom right now, but for myself and for my kids, is you got to get rid of like expectations that this is normal. This is like the most opposite of normal that we've ever lived through in my lifetime anyway. And what was not helpful was these expectations, that I was having experiences of like anxiety and, just, I just felt the political climate was pushing me and compressing all of this sense of I have no control over what's happening. I have no control over my kids' schooling. I have no control over my, the industry that I'm in within publishing is imploding, like what's happening. There are opportunities though to be involved in a community and have these forms of discussion. I think the number one thing that I would encourage is to find either in places of worship or within schools or any communities or any political organizations, nonprofits, there are people that are gathering over Zoom. Is Zoom like the greatest thing ever? It's rough. I'm not gonna lie. I get headaches from all the screen time. I'm not gonna lie. But I will say that one of the things that's helping me solidify my identity right now as a struggling mom in COVID is hearing from other people in the exact same position and at least normalizing the feeling that like, is this ever going to end? And feeling devastated. I really just want to be truthful about, I think it's okay to feel despair right now. I do. Is that the greatest feeling? No. But as someone that is just trying to be honest about how this political moment, how large and historic it is, I think you have to be honest about your narrative. And I do feel being with other moms of color, saying, this is really taking its toll, it does help me. It helps me see things clearly and not keeping it bottled up inside. I think the way Daniela was alluding to is you've got to let it out somewhere. And I firmly believe if you've even got one person to listen to affirm who you are in this time period, like right now, you have to prioritize your mental health. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think talking to other people who are in similar situations always helps, even to know that somebody else is in the same situation and that you're not alone. And I think that goes to a lot of the comments that we're getting in the Q&A, people feeling like they're listening to your story and Daniela's story and thinking like, oh, that was not just me. I wasn't the only one that was feeling like that in high school when I was the only person from this particular country or the only kid from, like this. So that kind of goes to one of my questions that I've been thinking about that I wanted to ask. And, you talk about talking to other people and creating, your communities. What would be your advice to give to people who are looking to be supportive allies, supportive advocates for immigrants and refugees? Because I think a lot of people do want to help and do want to be involved and maybe want to just be the person that they, that they talk to, but what would you be advised to someone to like, how can they support immigrants and refugees right now?
I'm in a lot of different communities. I think that as somebody that has been, working closely with feminists and women of color and human rights activists, and then I'm also, in predominantly white communities, there's a lot of Trump supporters in my life. There's a wide and diverse representation of people in my life. And I try to find pockets of hope from people who say that they want to help. And it makes me be really selective and patient to offer pockets of opportunity to people across political difference. So for instance, there's a lot of Trump supporters in my life. There just are. I know that I cannot talk to them this way. I cannot talk to them about DACA. I can't talk to them about growing an immigrant family. But one thing that I can tell them is through their communities of faith or through their local, what do you call them? Kind of like the mom boards or like the mom groups or forums or different things. When there are stories coming through around, specifically around charity, around donations, around money, And I just highlight, these are the needs. Like there's, you know, a young woman of color, undocumented, who's just given birth and is in real need, like some financial need. I appeal to the part that I know that they can give from, the space where like they can give money or they can give some material. I don't need for them to agree with me about public policy in that moment. So for me, the challenge is when I'm encountering an ally or someone that wants to be an ally, it is labor on my part, but I have to see where they can be useful and place them there, or ask them, like, you know, what is it that you're looking for? They're not going to text bank with me for sure. They're not going, you know, to post, you know, infographics about how Trump has paid less taxes than immigrant families. They won't do that, but they'll give $100 to someone who's just given birth who has no financial resources, and creating a narrative about, you know, maybe this isn't about politics in this moment, but just this baby needs to eat. So how can we make this happen? And forging narratives that appeal to allies across all different spectrums is difficult, it's tedious, and it's a lot of labor, but it's just something that I find I have to do. It's a useful function of storytelling to appeal to people where they are.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remind allies that there are people like you, there are people like me who I am always open to questions and to teach people, but they also should be mindful that that's not everybody's job. So you shouldn't expect just go talk to any immigrant and ask them questions, very intrusive questions. I just want to remind people that that's part of being a good ally, knowing who you should ask for education, I guess. We're getting close to the end, and there's one question that I think I'm going to throw to whoever wants to answer, probably Emily or Lisa, and is, what do you think 2020 has taught us about the U.S. relationship with immigrants and refugees? As a question from the audience. Whoever wants to answer that one.
I'll give it a shot, and then maybe Lisa as well. So, I mean, I think a lot of the lessons we've learned in COVID are just sort of like amplified when we think about how 2020 has affected immigrants and refugees. I mean, you think about everything from the fact that essential workers, like I mentioned earlier, are disproportionately working in a lot of the frontline jobs, a lot of the jobs where COVID exposure is really high, like in food processing or agriculture, housekeeping. I mean, I think today we just got the news that 3 housekeepers in the White House have tested positive for COVID due to obviously the reckless actions of our president and his other staff. And, just sort of thinking about the people that are most impacted, the frontline workers tend to be jobs that are disproportionately held by immigrants and people of color more generally. And so I think, COVID has really exposed like who as a society we value and how we treat people. And that's just, that's always apparent, but I think it's even more so now. I think also a lot of what has happened in COVID has been COVID has kind of given the Trump administration an excuse to do things it wanted to do already, essentially banning asylum at the border. I mean, we've seen that it didn't take long for the Trump administration to just start turning away asylum seekers and using COVID as a pretext for that decision. And that's what, it violates federal law, or it violates international law and federal law to turn people away who are seeking asylum. But the COVID crisis was used as an excuse to do so. And similarly with the refugee program, Trump has brought the refugee numbers for this coming year down to the lowest level it's been in I don't know how long. But so we just see this steady kind of erosion of the direction that the country was unfortunately already moving in, but it has now been exacerbated. So I wish I had a more hopeful answer than that, but unfortunately, I think that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, I sort of agree. So if anybody else has any last thoughts that they would like to share before we close today, we've had a great panel today. I'm really thankful for all of you for agreeing to come today. So if you have any other thoughts that you want to share before I do my closing. No? Okay. Well, thank you so much. Your stories have been really inspiring, and thank you, Emily, for all the work that you do. So we hope everybody that came today have been really inspired by all these stories and have gotten ideas of maybe how they can help. The rest of the month, we'll be having 3 more sessions. The next one will be on education. And I saw in the Q&A that there's been a lot of questions about how to support students, how to support people wanting to go to higher education, what schools do, what can people do in, create programs in their communities. I think some of those questions will be answered next week. We will be having a great panelists talk about both K through 12 and higher education and issues related to, immigrants and refugees and DACA students as well. And then after that, we'll be talking about immigration. And our last panel will be talking about change and how to bring change. So give people ideas on how they can get involved and kind of highlight some people and some organizations who are doing really great work to improve the lives of immigrants and refugees in Ohio. So we really hope that you join us again, and thank you so much for coming today. This is our first panel. I'm really glad we didn't have a lot of technical difficulties. I was a little worried since it was the first one. We have a evaluation link that will be sent to you. It's also in the chat box for everybody. We will be giving a gift card to one person if you do the evaluation. So we really thank you for coming today. We hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much to all the speakers for coming today again. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Maria.
Okay. We're ending a little early, but I think this is the right time to end. So we hope you have a really great day of the afternoon. It looks like a pretty day in Dayton, at least. So hopefully you all are having a really pretty day up where you are too. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.